Tian continued. I dare say that Scholar He has the birth name Xuan, and the details of his birth are exactly the same as my lord's. To commit fraudulent deeds and deceive the heavens couldn't be managed so casually, and not just anyone would do. There were certain requirements that needed to be met. From the 3 questions that the Reverend of Empty Words asked when it first captured Shiqing Xuan, it firmly retained 2 things. First, the name of its prey contained the word Xuan, and second, the birth information of its prey. However, it didn't recognize the prey's face and had needed Shiqing Xuan to approach for it to see. Since the Shi family was speedy in remedying the situation, other than those 2 items, the Reverend probably knew nothing else. Thus, if there must be one who could take Shiqing Xuan's place to take on his misfortune, it must be a male who was born the same year, same month, same day, same time, and their name must contain Xuan. How difficult must it be to find such a scapegoat? The world is vast. Even if Shawudu used his everything to search, there still might not be one. Using the powers and influence of his watermaster status, he cast the net and actually found someone. And it was one who possessed the potential to ascend, about to go through his first heavenly calamity. Such luck, how could he let it go? Compared to arduous cultivation, this was a convenient shortcut. If he missed this chance, it might not come again. Having made it to this point, Ming Yi seemed to also have drawn the same conclusions, and his face was growing darker. Shiqing Xuan first nodded, then suddenly seemed to have remembered something. He looked to Hua Chang, who was leaning against the door. After all, something like this shouldn't be discussed in front of a ghost. However, Hua Chang only chuckled with his arms crossed. He said, No need to look at me, Lord Windmaster. The one you should worry about isn't me. I have nothing to do with this whole business. Instead, why don't you concern yourself with whether anyone else in the upper court has gotten a hold of this weakness of your brothers? Ming Yi accused darkly. You really do have spies in the heavens. Hua Chang replied lazily. Don't you already know that? The Lord Earthmaster was originally sent to the Ghost City to investigate this, but it seemed that the spy was planted deeply, and even after over a decade, they still weren't found out. Hua Chang said that this whole business had nothing to do with him, so naturally Shilian believed him and didn't think more on it. Yet, Hua Chang also said, why not worry about others in the upper court? Which reminded Shilian of another thing. So he asked, Lord Windmaster, that night at the terrace of Cascading Wine, why did you open the doors to the protection array yourself? Did someone call you out? Who was that person? Yeah, Shiqing Xuan replied. It was the Reverend of Empty Words. It said. Shilian crossed his hands into his sleeves. How did it know your verbal password? He asked. Ming Yi's face was dark. He said, Isn't it because this guy just had to go around and make friends, yapping non-stop, whether others are free or not? He talks too much. Shiqing Xuan was aggrieved. Ming Xiong, you can't say it like that, he said. The ones who call on me are all heavenly officials of the upper court. I've never given anything personal away to that creature. Since the Reverend of Empty Words has been lying low for so many years, now that it's returned and can even uncover Lord Watermaster's secret so thoroughly, then for it to figure out Lord Windmaster's verbal password shouldn't be hard, Shilian said. Someone must have leaked your verbal password. Whether intentional or not, it's worth investigating. Ming Yi added, "So, did you see what it looked like? What did it do after calling you out?" Shi Qingshun's head seemed to be hurting. He said, "I don't know what it looks like. It cast a spell. I couldn't see clearly." He was vague and didn't say what he saw either. Ming Yi was becoming frosty. Shilian figured it was probably the gory scenes of the bloody fire social, and those were certainly difficult to describe. A moment later, Shi Qingshun sighed and said, "I'm the useless one. If I could have ascended on my own, none of this would have happened." Shi Qingshun's original fate was probably considered pretty good in mortal terms already. Otherwise, the Reverend of Empty Words wouldn't have set its eyes on him. However, it still might be a long way away from ascension. Those who could ascend were all protected by spiritual aura, and inhuman creatures would have a hard time doing anything to them. Besides, what monster or demon would want to mess with a future heavenly official? Whether a person could ascend didn't depend on how smart they were. Intelligence and effort might not matter at all, and exploiting rare treasures and devices certainly wouldn't increase their chances. Sometimes it's just like that. 10 years of study couldn't compare to natural wit and talent. 100 years of bloody struggles couldn't compare to a moment's enlightenment. If it wasn't written in fate, then it wasn't. The Watermaster could spend all he wanted on his younger brother, but without that fate, Shi Qingshun would very well be stuck in the middle court and become nothing more than the leading lamb of junior officials. That he was able to make it to where he was today, to shine with endless glory, was all because his older brother stole something that belonged to another and gave it to him. If he had even a shred of conscience, it wasn't hard to imagine how it must feel after having learned the truth. If the exchange had never happened, then the one who possessed the real potential to ascend, how glorious would he have been today? Having thought this, a light suddenly went off in Shilian's mind. "No," he said, "Lord Windmaster, the one who called you out wasn't the Reverend of Empty Words." Shi Qingshun raised his bowed head. "Huh?" he asked. "That voice definitely belonged to it. I wouldn't have mistaken that." No, it was its voice, but that doesn't mean that the body still belonged to it," Shilian said. "Everyone, do you remember? The prey that the Reverend of Empty Words set its sight on all died by way of suicide, except for one person." After a pause, he continued, "How did Scholar He die? How was it portrayed at the bloody fire social? Was it suicide?" Shi Qingshun's eyes grew wide. He said, "It wasn't suicide. It was exhaustion," Ming Yi completed. "That's right," Shilian exclaimed. Even though he was hounded by misfortune, to the end, never once did Scholar He think of killing himself. He said somberly, "Think about it. This man had an abnormally strong determination, having been struck by so many unfair, unjust encounters. If this was a typical person, he would have long since given up or ended everything. Yet he always fought back. He never backed down over anything. I think that, perhaps, once the Reverend of Empty Words found him, it never managed to suck what it wanted: fear. The cause of his death wasn't suicide because of fear and despair. After the Reverend of Empty Words clung on to him, it didn't eat good fruit, but a steel plate instead. It broke its teeth, losing thoroughly in the end." Listening to him, Shi Qingshun shook his head and sighed earnestly. "I really am nothing compared to this man," he said. Shilian continued. "He died filled with murderous intent and resentment. I don't think a battered soul like that would rest in peace. If not at peace, it would thirst for revenge. So, Lord Windmaster, I believe that the current Reverend of Empty Words couldn't possibly be the same one that sought you out when you were born. Instead, it was Scholar He who stubbornly fought back till the end and bit back at the Reverend, or rather, He Xuan. Shi Qingshan and Ming Yi were both stunned by his claim. Hua Cheng added quietly, "Ghosts devouring ghosts. When humans eat humans, at most, the stomach gets full. When ghosts devour ghosts, with the correct method, they can absorb the other's powers and abilities and use them as their own." This can also explain why the Reverend of Empty Words knew so many of the details of this whole affair, Shilian said. A monster like it is dull and eccentric. It shouldn't be so intelligent. However, the one that's now returned to pursue you two is he wanted to use the word hybrid, but it didn't feel accurate. Just then, Hua Cheng supplied, "Enhanced entity." "Right," Shilian said. After Scholar He swallowed up the Reverend of Empty Words, his mind was in complete control. The him now not only possesses the ability to curse, he's also very clever, and it possessed bottomless resentment toward the two of you. So, even though it already knew Shi Qingshan's verbal password, it didn't cast a death curse through the private communication array at the start. Instead, it tightened the snare gradually, forcing Shi Qingshan to plug his own ears, shut his own eyes, and lock himself in an empty room. Like a cat that caught a mouse, it wouldn't kill immediately, and would play and play until the mouse killed itself from terror. A moment later, Ming Yi said, "Now that it's come to this, what do you plan to do?" Everyone looked to Shi Qingshan. Shi Qingshan had already messed up his own hair from all the unconscious scratching. He responded bemusedly, "Well, don't look at me. I don't know what to do either. I just don't know how to look at my brother now. It was his blood brother, after all, and this heinous crime, harming the life of another, was committed for his sake. So it was understandable if he didn't know what to do for the moment," Shi Qingshan said. "But I gotta beg everyone here to absolutely keep this a secret. Just for now, just give me a little time to think just what to do." Even though I've been thinking for days now, I had never thought. Anyway, I just need time to calm down and reflect. Toward the end, he was rambling, and his eyes were unfocused. Shiwudu kept saying that he was going to treat Shi Qingshan's illness, but what illness was there to treat? Unless it was his fall from divine grace, his change back into a mortal. His illness could only be cured if his fate was changed again and he ascended once more. Although it would be difficult to find another qualifying candidate, who knew what other evil spell Shiwudu would come up with? No wonder Shi Qingshan was whining about becoming immortal and abandoning his godhood, desperate to flee. As for that scroll about the Reverend of Empty Words that was filled with errors, no doubt it was made to mislead Shi Qingshan, making sure he didn't discover the truth. Who knew if it was put together by Shiwudu or Lingwen? But at the beginning, when Shiwudu needed to find a qualifying candidate, he must have needed the help of the palace of Lingwen. Did Lingwen herself really know nothing of this? If there was a heavenly official like Shi Qingshan who ascended this way, would it be possible that there was a second or a third or even more other heavenly officials who ascended the same way? If that was the case, then it would be horrifying. The world would be turned upside down. This must be treated with the utmost gravity. Other than Hua Cheng, who wasn't involved and was at ease, enjoying himself. Everyone else in the little cottage was all gloom and doom, as if a great enemy was about to descend upon them. Just then, there was a commotion outside the cottage. There were oxen mooing furiously, and even more farmers shouting, "Stop! Stop! What are you planning, so full of killing intent?" Tian moved to the door and peeked out through the crack. "It's General Pei," he said. Pei Ming had only just been beaten down by Chuan Yizhen, fighting in a brawl, yet he appeared perfectly fine, standing outside. Before him was a leaning stone slab marking the boundary, and he seemed rather wary of it, afraid to enter rashly, so he remained standing there with the sword in hand. The farmers gripped their pickaxes and sickles, their faces written with unwelcoming expressions. That black ox in the paddy blew out a few heavy breaths from its large nostrils, and suddenly stood on its hind legs. An instant later, it became a large, buff man, rather handsome, with a small, steel nose ring. He laughed and said, "Well, I'll be. Ain't this General Pei? What a rare guest. What winds blew my lord over today? Let me say this first. We've got nothing to do with your little Pei." Tian knew it. Earlier, when he saw that black ox in the paddies, he recalled a faint impression. Sure enough, this place was Mount Yulong, Rain Master Country. Back then, it was also this ox Xiong who lent the Rain Master hat for Tian to create rain. The years had gone by, yet it was impressive as always, and still ploughed the fields with honest strength. Shi Chuan also squeezed over to the crack in the door, speaking to Tian. "That ox from Rain Master's household, he's a good guy." Pei Ming had once suffered a loss at the hands of the Rain Master, so naturally he was courteous and polite at the moment. He said, "Please, no need to flatter me. Pei didn't come to seek the ruler of Yusha. May I inquire if Lord Windmaster had come by your esteemed country?"